Thank you so very much for being here with us tonight, Dr. Simeon Hein. There's a lot of controversy over these topics we're going to discuss tonight. Mm-hmm. So why don't you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself and how you got to the Institute of how you opened up the Institute of Resonance and what you do there.
Well, Christie, I was kind of taught the same story about who we are as the rest of us were, by the kind of traditional educational systems in college and graduate school and so forth. And I kind of, until I was about 30 or so, I kind of had a certain idea about how the world worked. And then I came across this topic of remote viewing, which I was kind of originally skeptical of. My training was as a sociologist, statistician and so forth. And, I came across this topic of remote viewing. I heard Dr. Courtney Brown talking about it on my local community radio station. And he was really talking about some wild stuff, like you could put your mind into the past or the future and go visit other planets and so forth. And I just got so, I was kind of so amazed that such a thing could exist. I just thought to disprove it, I would take the course myself to see that, to really show myself that this was impossible. But I really found that, like a lot of people, even the most critical skeptics of the SRI program in the 70s that kind of started this in our country, most recently, even though this is not really new, it's kind of new to us as Americans. The most critical skeptics turned out to be the best viewers, and I turned out to be, pretty fairly good at it. And I kind of, even though I couldn't explain how I was getting the results I was getting on the page, it was clear to me that there's some other channel of information going on where I could draw a target that was hidden in a folder that I hadn't seen ahead of time. And even though my rational mind didn't want to believe it, I was kind of doing it. And that really, it opened me up to a lot of other topics that I initially hadn't really taken seriously before, even heard about before, like crop circles or things like channeling or, communications with spirits and lots of stuff about extraterrestrials and UFOs and all sorts of things. And I just began to look at these and began to wonder whether we had kind of grown up with blinders on, that there's just a bigger reality out there than we're taught about by the institutions we go up around, and whether we really need to take a look at this because, we're in this situation right now where it looks like the existing system isn't doing so well, and maybe we should be looking at these other alternative, paradigms.
Absolutely. What was the first class that you took to try to disprove this stuff?
Well, it was Dr. Courtney Brown's 8-day remote viewing class that he taught at the time at the Farsight Institute, which was his own institute that he taught on the side when he wasn't teaching over at Emory University. He's a political scientist. Or he's in the political science department. He does mathematical modeling. And he, on the side, he had this amazing sort of thing. He had written this book, Cosmic Voyage, and his publisher made him set up a teaching institute as part of the publishing deal. To show if he really believed in this, he would kind of teach classes in it. And so he set up this institute to go along with the publishing deal and taught classes. And, we had a lot of people going through there. And after like day 3, I was definitely getting results which I couldn't explain rationally. If you look I was
going to ask, of these 8 days, when did you start to realize that there must be more to this?
It is so weird, Christie, because you're sitting there with a blank page and a pen. We used Uniball micro pens, because they kind of flow quickly. The Magic RV pen. And I really, you're sitting there, you don't think, the way we are taught about reality, you don't think that if I just give you a blank sheet of paper, right, that you could describe something you haven't seen that's maybe in another room or sitting 20 feet behind you on a table or something. You just don't think you can do it. Mm-hmm. And your rational mind doesn't think you can do it. But if you just follow the instructions, all of a sudden you're reproducing the picture or getting very good descriptions. And what did it for me was a session we did of, there's kind of a famous picture of Cancun, Mexico, of that beach kind of, and you kind of see the curve of the bay and the hotels in the background.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you might have seen it. I mean, it's a kind of it's where people stand to take pictures of it. And, I was just doing this session. I don't know what the target is ahead of time. And all of a sudden I'm hearing people speaking in Spanish. And I'm seeing like these hotels and getting like this bay and this beach. And I just think, I got to be making this up, right? And then I saw the picture afterwards, and I had drawn what that view looks like exactly, with the rocks and the boats out there and people on the beach and the hotels. I just said, wow, I mean, something really happened here that I can't explain. And that might mean there's a lot more that I was taught about reality. That might not be true. If this is true, what else have we been taught, isn't real that could be true too? And I started going to UFO conferences of all things because I now, we viewed UFOs towards the end of the class, like day 7 or 8. You can't really verify it, but I really became curious because some of my sessions kind of looked like that Cancun session. I mean, they had the same feeling. And I thought, if that Cancun session was accurate, then maybe these are accurate too, and that means we're being visited by extraterrestrials like right now, like they're around, on the Earth. And so I began going to UFO conferences, which led to me meeting people who studied crop circles and all sorts of other amazing topics. And, I've been kind of going that direction ever since, there's just a much bigger scientific paradigm. I'm kind of interested in not just jumping the gun and saying it's not scientific because we can't fit it, into our paradigm. I want to know how we can expand our existing paradigm so that this stuff works within that, rather than just, accepting it blindly. My bent is to see how does it fit into what we know, any little bit of science that we know, and it fits in a lot of different ways. It fits in a lot of different ways, and that's really, to me, what makes the whole thing exciting.
I think it's just so amazing, as a skeptic, you tried it basically to disprove it, and 3 days later you're hooked, and then the next year, right, what is it, 97, when you began the Institute for Resonance in Boulder?
That's right.
And so now you're teaching something you thought, a decade ago never could have existed.
Isn't that amazing?
I love it. I absolutely love it. And I have to tell you, I know that, I don't know if you're in the text chat interface, but there's definitely another few skeptics here that are having, a hard time grasping this. But I totally understand that as well.
I totally understand where they're coming from. My mind still doesn't accept it in some ways. Honestly, there's a part of my mind, I guess I'll never recover from graduate school, that says, come on, I mean, how is this possible? And yet I can see, I teach classes in it, I do practice sessions. We did one the other day. In fact, I posted it on the website, the learnrv.org website. People can see it was just a picture of a woman in kind of a bridesmaid dress kind of running through a botanical garden. And you can just see what the guy got so much of information in there in the picture he couldn't see ahead of time, and yet he described it very well. You can just see how it works. And the thing is, here's the deal. Our minds do not like things that we can't explain in some way. And what remote viewing is asking you to do is to, even though we don't have a theory that, there's different theories about why it could work, all of which could be true, superconductivity and kind of quantum explanations and all sorts of different explanations. Whatever works for you. I can't totally say conclusively exactly why it works, but I think the evidence shows that it does. And you kind of have to make a leap of faith. And it's good for your mind, because some of us, you can start suffering from hardening of the attitudes. And once you start suffering from hardening of the attitudes in your life, you may never recover again, Your reality shrinks to, and that's exactly what we're suffering through right now in this country. And I guess it's a good thing. We can't just keep doing things the same old way forever, especially if it stops working. You got to try new things, and it's scary, but that's what reality asks of you.
Exactly. Try it. You might like it. One of the comments on the interface reads, minds are closed for a reason, the same reason why computers need firewalls. How would you respond to that?
Well, yeah, that is partly true. You want firewalls against viruses, but any idea is a virus. Language. Would that person want a firewall against language? Because there was an article in New Scientist recently that described language as a parasite. Because once it gets in there, you can't get it out. And, where do you want to draw the line? Because if you stop at some point, you're never going to grow again. And we have a name for societies like that. They're called extinct. And is that your idea of what we should become? Is something that is so rigid that you can never change? When that person is suggesting, I can't see your interface. I'm not trying to be mean to this person, but come on. Reality changes from time to time. The environment changes, and societies, animals, anything that doesn't adjust after a while, goes the way of dinosaurs. and we could do that. I was talking to someone in the business community the other day, in the banking world, and I asked her if she used YouTube videos to promote. This is a major Wall Street, kind of investment firm, and she said they didn't. They never use YouTube because they thought that was kind of like for kids. Mm-hmm. And there's a way to relate to your customers, a way to explain what you do, to relate to people. And because I use it all the time just to tell people how, what we do. And she said, no, we're like dinosaurs. And I thought that's really kind of true because, you never really grow after some point. It's just pure competition, pure reptilian competition. So anyway, you don't want your mind to be so open that you don't have any, I'm not suggesting you just believe in anything. But look, we've had a lot of statistical studies of remote viewing. Going back to the 70s when Jessica Utts from the University of California was hired by one of the congressional committees or by, I think it was the SRI department or whoever was funding at the time, it could have been the CIA, to really see if there were results from this 20-year program. I think it was in the 80s, yeah. And she found that there was a statistically significant result from doing remote viewing above and beyond what you get by chance. And
Are you speaking of Operation Stargate?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Stargate had statistical analysis done, and they found that, this is Jessica Utts is kind of well-known, world-renowned statistician. She's very objective. She doesn't believe in this one word. I read that report. So, I think the studies show, if you read books by Dean Radin, where they do these very careful statistical studies, but what I've found is that there's no amount of evidence that will ever convince a very super skeptical mind. You could see it in front of you, and your mind will, it's called inattentional blindness. That phenomena where a gorilla can walk across, that screen, that little experiment. Have you seen that, Christie?
I don't think I'm familiar with that.
It was, I think it came out of, was it MIT or somewhere where they discovered this phenomena that your mind actually blocks out things that you don't want to believe in. And I saw this myself. The first time I couldn't believe it. They created this experiment. I think it's on YouTube. You can probably see it yourself. You just have two teams, and one's in white jerseys and one's in black jerseys, and they just say count the number of times the people in the white jerseys pass a basketball between them.
Oh, yes, I've seen that one. It is on YouTube. Uh-huh.
And then the gorilla walks across, the guy in the gorilla suit. Like 70, 80% of the people do not see the gorilla, and I didn't see it either. They showed this at a conference about this sort of topic, subtle energy conference in Boulder once. I didn't see it either. In fact, I don't think anyone in the audience raised their hand when they asked them, what did you see? And you see it this next time. It's where you're focusing. So what we know about the way the human mind works is it confabulates and it blocks out tons of stuff that you don't believe to be true. And I believe this is happening with remote viewing too. You could look at the data, you could see the statistics and say, look, the chance of this happening purely randomly, there's no effect there. It's like 1 out of 1 billion or something when you put all these studies together. And yet part of your mind will still say, I don't believe it. It's just because you grew up thinking it wasn't true and your mind doesn't really want to adjust. And this is always true with science, by the way. The Wright brothers were considered a hoax 2 years after they had been flying.
Yeah.
The Scientific American said things that are heavier than air can't fly. Duh.
And the world was flat, right?
Oh, and before that, the world was flat. And what did they say about the people that invented anything that we live around, like light bulbs, television, or, boats with props? It was all considered a hoax at one time. And it takes a while. So when people say this sort of reaction, I had that too originally. But the only fair thing to do is, any sort of skepticism. I think you were talking about a lot of topics before, I came on here, 9/11, whatever, is just, it's okay to not believe in something, but you should be able to look at the evidence objectively and at least look at it and not just scoff it away. And we can all have different views, but at least be willing to say, what would you need to see to be convinced it was real? What would convince you? And if you can say what it is, then your mind is open. But I'm not trying to convince people remote viewing is real. Just take a class in it for yourself sometime, and you'll see that something's going on.
Well, I'm not singling anyone out here on the interface, but I do want to read a few of the skeptics' messages.
Sure, go ahead.
And basically, let's see. You are messing, I changed the word here, with forces that are not good. They are evil. So what people are seeing are evil demons. God would never give imperfect humans that power and then kind of joked, this is the evil Christie. You're messing with something you don't fully understand. So, of course, my response was, well, maybe you're knocking something you don't understand. And, my personal beliefs on religion, because this seems to be coming from a religious viewpoint, is that it was obviously created by man and something that was designed to control the people. So, my perspective is that they don't want people to know this exists, because we would obviously be living in a much better world. We wouldn't sell ourselves to slavery. And, I can go on that topic forever, but I would like to hear your perspective on those comments.
Well, I disagree with those comments, and the reason is because what you're using is something that's built into you. It's innate. It's your subconscious mind and how it links into kind of this field of infinite energy. And that is created by the Creator, however you define the Creator. But, it's just there already, and we happen to show up here. And I really can't believe that any creator wants us to be here and not use our abilities completely. It's almost like asking someone who has these extra limbs, arms or legs, that you don't know are there your whole life, to go around just dragging them around when they could be strengthened and toned and used in a very productive way. And I just don't believe that whatever created us wants us to have abilities and skills and, these kind of talents and not make use of them. Even Jesus said, is it not written in your laws, I said ye are gods?
Well, absolutely. I brought that point up as well in the interface because, hello, he walked on water, right? He fed thousands of people with one loaf of bread. He healed people. Yeah. He did all these things that we refer to as paranormal or evil or not natural. And he said, all of these miracles I perform, you can, and even more.
Exactly what he said. And so I cannot see how this is in any way conflicts with any of the ideas of Christianity at all, or any of the major religions. The whole point of what we're being taught, whatever particular religion you adhere to, is to grow and to expand and to be a good person and to contribute to your community. And if you're not using all of the abilities you have, it's kind of like operating on 1.5 cylinders when you got a 6-cylinder engine. What would be the point of that? So there's nothing inherently evil about this or bad. Now, of course, it could be used that way, but I took out my clip-it knife yesterday in a restaurant because there wasn't any knives there, Now, that I was using that to cutting my pork dinner. I could use that clip-it in a different way, and it could be considered an offensive weapon, right? It's all the context. It's not the knife itself. Using it to eat dinner is considered perfectly acceptable activity. If I pull it out to the cashier, right, there's a different context there. It's the same way with remote viewing. And with anything that, anything could be used in a beneficial way, could also be used as a weapon. It's really the context. And the law that we live under acknowledges that completely. And I would say that the universal law that we live under, it's the same way. If you use it in a productive, positive fashion with a good intent, that's all you're going to get back from it. But the caller has a point in some senses. I was talking about this on a psychic call-in show last summer, a kind of national call-in show. And the first question was, can you use this to stalk people? And I was, it's like, I said, wow, that's kind of a real positive thinking there. It's like, what do you want to be? It's anything you have can be used in multiple ways. And this takes a certain level of responsibility. I never use it to spy on people or do anything like that. It's a tool to learn more about this universe we live in. And what we learn when we use it is that it's a universe filled with a lot of different types of life. And if you consider that, bad or evil, maybe you should check into a different universe, because that's the universe we live in. It's got a lot of different life forms in it, and that's something we just have to learn to live with.
Absolutely. maybe you can describe for our listeners what exactly these subtle energies are. I mean, maybe if we start by defining that, we can hopefully bring them to a different level of understanding of how all of this does in fact work.
Well, what it is, Christie, is we historically, until very recently, a lot of the time we're in a survival mode. We may actually be back there again because of the way we created our society, right now, the past couple of months. But, yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are feeling that way. But, for thousands of years, while we were kind of more kind of in a survival mode, hunter-gatherers and so forth, your senses are pretty much focused on, finding food and then fight or flight and so forth. And that's pretty much it during a lot of the day because, there's a lot of dangers out there. There's a lot of animals that could eat you, until recently they were a threat to people. And we live in a time where we don't have those immediate threats as apparently as they used to be for most of the time. And so when you relax a little bit and you have time to detach a little bit from the immediate needs of survival that our environment used to kind of impose on us, what you find is you have a lot of subtle sensing abilities. And these aren't really like inherently super mystical. It's just it from like gut feelings you get about people and situations sometimes, or you're just going down the road and you have a feeling to take a different way to go to work or something. That actually is remote viewing. And it only comes across most of the time when you're in a situation that is dangerous or really requires extra special attention. And these other subtle senses, which are there all the time, it's just most of the time they're masked over by our physical senses because that's usually what matters to us, right? Just what's right around you. But you can be in a situation, and I'm sure you've talked to a lot of people about this. I mean, I've talked to a lot. They said, like, they
we try.
Well,
those who will listen.
You know what I'm saying? People have had situations where they just knew that a relative had passed away during the night. They got that feeling. Now, how do you explain that if it's just you're all just these physical things sitting here and there's no extra communication? That's a subtle energy. Some part of your body is connected to the people in your family and people around you that are important to you. And when something happens to them, you can feel it, And that's remote viewing. What the training that the military figured out how to do, and people a long time ago, indigenous peoples, and even going back to the Vedic sutras, back in India thousands of years ago, is that you can deliberately focus your mind on what you want to focus using those same skills. Normally it only kicks in when you really need it or when something happens that really affects you. But, oftentimes you can deliberately focus in on something, and for however it works, and it doesn't really come through your mind. It really does come through your body as a feelings about things. We're connected. The universe is holographic. We're really kind of connected to everything. There's another very subtle pathways of energy that are going on all the time of communication. Now, most of the time, your mind is deleting 99.99% of it because it's just how much can you take in that matters every moment. But if you deliberately go into a room and quiet your mind down and say, I'm just going to view a target that, someone else has selected for me that, you trust, you can actually get some information about that too. And depending, how clear the connection is, there are some people that are naturally really good at this. You've heard of them, Joe McMonagle or Ingo Swann or Pat Price or people like that, Beverly Yeagers. I mean, some of these people, Beverly Yeagers actually had to be trained, she said, but, these people are so good that they can just locate people from thousands of miles away and do amazing things, just describe notes and papers on a desk with the words. I mean, just stuff that's incredible. Picture perfect, drawings of things. That's the same skill. Somehow, for some reason, they're a little more honed in than the rest of us. My ability is pretty much close to average. But the fact that you can do it at all shows that there's just another pathway of communication. And if you focus on it, paradoxically, the more you try to use it just for your own narrow purposes, there's kind of something kind of kicks it back out again. But it almost seems when you're a little detached from the outcome, it's a nice paradox. It works better when you don't kind of care about the result so much. I'm not talking about the survival situation where you just know you need to take some action just for some gut feeling. But when you do it, like directed at some sort of target that's not particularly related to you for training purposes or operational purposes, it really does seem to provide you with more information than you can just get from your physical senses. And that just the fact that that's true means that we're a lot more than just a physical body, what we are.
Absolutely, I agree. And even the skeptics have had intuition or a gut feeling.
Yeah.
And that's basically where that subtle energy comes in that we need to learn to pay attention to. No?
Yes, that's right. And, it's interesting how a lot of people kind of come upon this. I know Russell Targ said that he used to do magic tricks to raise money to go through college, and sometimes he would know more about the person pretending to read their mind. He would actually do it accurately and couldn't explain how he had known so much about them. And a lot of people that work with audiences have found this from time to time, is even though they're just doing this as an experiment, even could be a trick, all of a sudden they get some really accurate information that there's no way they could have known. And it's proved to even magicians occasionally that there's more going on than meets the eye. And I think the data shows that. Of course, the best way is for you to, take your own class in it sometime. I'm not saying necessarily with me, but I mean with anyone, and just see for yourself. That's really the honest way to do it. And because I remember the stories of SRI, they said the most skeptical people were people from the CIA, and the people that were paying for the program.
Yet they're using these technologies, so, they obviously must work.
Well, back then, I don't know if they were using it in the 70s. So I have talked to Special Forces soldiers that said they were taught how to do it in Vietnam. So someone knew about this well before this program we've heard about, SRI program in the 70s, because they were teaching it back in the 60s to Special Forces soldiers back then. So someone must have known about it. But the people that they had monitoring the program, the funding people that were saying, how are we spending, the taxpayers' money to fly out to California, they said some of those people were really skeptical, and they'd have them sit down and do a session, and then the person would say, you must have been whispering into my ear somehow, so, leave the room when I do it next time. They'd leave the room, and the person said, well, you must have been, somehow you got the information. So they'd lock the person in the room, put the target in another room. There's no way, and the person would still, and they'd say, this really works. And, here's the funny thing, Christie. The people that are the most skeptical about this become the biggest believers in it when they see it working. I've seen it myself. Some of these people were so skeptical at Farsight, they became some of the best viewers once they saw how it's working. Doesn't mean they understand it. I still don't totally understand it. I have my own theories, but once you get that perfect picture and you see what it was, and you drew it, down to this detail, and you go, whoa, how did I do that? The fact is, you don't know how you did it, but it doesn't matter. You still did it.
Well, I wonder what kind of discounts you offer skeptics, say, for the online phone course. I mean, let's try to light a fire under their butt here, and
special
if we could actually show it to them.
I have nothing against skeptics. I'm one too. I come across stuff that I don't necessarily find credible all the time, but I'm willing to say, what the criteria are for me to change my mind. You and I might disagree about something. So it's okay to be skeptical, but just at least be willing to admit you could be wrong, right? And that maybe it is true. And if that's the case, you need to explore it honestly before you come to a conclusion. The most annoying thing is people I come across who just they're so dead set against it. And they've never studied it. They go and they get something off the internet and from something from one of these skeptical websites, and they haven't really looked at the evidence. And if you haven't, I remember this book I saw in college. It was called 100 Scientists Prove Einstein Wrong. It was written in 1920. And we don't remember a single name of those 100 scientists. But we remember Einstein, right? Now, he could be wrong. There's some theories now that think it's not quite right. His theories are relatively, because some of the numbers don't quite add up. But it wasn't for those reasons. Those people were just skeptics back then. They were physics professors and all sorts of people. And even then, they couldn't accept Einstein. People couldn't accept quantum mechanics. I think Lord Kelvin said in 1900, he said that everything that had been discovered in physics had been discovered now. And it's like 108 years ago. And that all was a question of doing more experiments to get some of the math, but there was nothing new left, right, like 5 years before the discovery of quantum mechanics, the beginning of it. So, when people say that something is not possible, especially educated scientific people, I guarantee you almost inevitably it's wrong. Because that's what history shows us. And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting, is that feeling you get in your gut that this can't be true. That feeling is usually, historically, if you look at it, not correct. And it's not your fault. It's just because it's how your mind works. It's defensive. It wants to keep things the same way you were when you were 5.
And it was what you taught, or what we, not what you taught.
What you learned.
What we were taught.
It's what you were taught by your parents
real.
and your teachers and the people in your church or synagogue or wherever. And you want to believe that those people were doing the right thing for you. And they thought that they were, except they just didn't have as much information as we have now. And we cannot stay in that same place anymore. I mean, look what's happening to our society right now. If we just keep saying we're just going to keep doing the same things we've been doing for the last 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years over and over again, well, what do you think we're going to be like if we don't change a little bit? We got to adapt. And this sort of stuff like remote viewing, subtle energy, is saying, hey, there are new resources of energy and information available to us that we could be using that are helpful and productive, even just on an economic level. Wired Magazine had this article called Revenge of the Right Brain in February 2005, a couple of years ago. They're already saying we need to have more right-brained, education, because that's what creates movies and music and all sorts of, jobs that can't be outsourced so easily to India and China. Creativity.
Yeah.
And so
absolutely.
We're really good. I mean, the music, some of the music we produce in this country is just, it's recognized all over the world with that distinctive quality it has. And it's right-brained activity. So we're not just talking about being psychic or something here. We're talking about tapping into a whole level of creativity in the human character that I really think has been suppressed for hundreds of years because it's not as neat and clean as the logical, rational, sequential mind that we've somehow been led to believe is superior to that kind of holistic, intuitive mind. We've almost been at war with the intuitive mind, and I think our economy is suffering from it right now. We're suffering from a crisis of creativity. We got a lot of creative people in this country. I really can't believe we're out of ideas. It's just we haven't given a lot of, authority to different ways of doing things. We've wanted to fit in a certain mold, and we've kind of exhausted about how far you can get with that mold. I mean, just think about it. Let's use this example. I mean, you can get to the moon with Newtonian mechanics, right? Thinking more force and mass and acceleration, right? That works to get you to the moon reasonably well, but it's not going to get you to Alpha Centauri. And that's kind of where we are. We've gone as far as we can in the financial market and the way we kind of finance things and who owns things in our country. And that system has kind of gone as far as it can, and it's just cracking at the seams because something about it is incomplete. And what it's really lacking is a kind of inclusiveness.
Can you describe for us the quantum perspective?
Well, sure. Let's just look at first the other perspective that we've grown up around. It's the reductionist paradigm, the kind of mechanistic paradigm that we got from, the so-called Cartesian Newtonian paradigm. And that's the idea that the world is a big machine, the universe is a big machine, and you can kind of break it down in these parts, right? And if you can figure out what the parts do, then you can understand the whole machine. Well, the quantum perspective is kind of something that really undermined this whole perspective about 100 years ago because it says that there's really no fundamental parts there, which I know for the mind, it's a little hard to grasp that, but it's telling us that what we see around us that looks so solid is actually just blips of energy in this vacuum. And if you look closely enough under a microscope at anything around you, there's mostly nothing there but empty space. And these blips on and off in this kind of dark vacuum of energy. The kind of the universe arises out of this vacuum. And even in the state of nothingness, something's popping out of it, which is really traditionally a kind of a non-Western way of looking at it, but that's what quantum mechanics says our universe consists of. It's kind of a field of energy. And the weird thing about it is it says that particles can interact across a big distance, billions of miles, without going between the intervening space. So that if you do one thing to particle A and it's like a brother or sister of particle B, the particle B will react even a billion miles away. It's kind of the non-locality principle. So what it's telling us, Christie, is that it's a non-local universe, and that is really weird from a traditional scientific point of view, that things can interact without going between the space in between. The whole Newtonian thing says it's like a chain of gears, right, from A to B to C to D, like the way your car works.
Uh-huh.
But the quantum point of view is more like the way our body is, which that information can go from one point to another without going in the space in between. There's no direct connection in between of gears. It just jumps across the space because at a frequency level, the particles are connected. And that's a whole different way of looking at things than the traditional Newtonian point of view.
Well, we hear that for every action there's a opposite and equal reaction. But these reactions could actually occur according to the quantum perspective.
Yeah.
That they could occur millions or billions of miles or next
right.
door away. It doesn't necessarily have to be right there, something we can see.
That's right. And that's think about that. That means we could be affecting things in other parts of the universe that don't even understanding how we're doing it. Yeah.
Okay. Well, tell us a little bit about the holographic potentials you speak of in your book.
Well, that is also kind of a related idea, and it's becoming holography is becoming very important recently. There are some experiments done at this particle detector in Germany over the past couple of months, and the only way they can explain it is that, it doesn't make sense, but they're getting these effects in there that indicate that the whole thing is a big hologram, essentially that the whole universe is in every gram of the universe, that it completely self-replicates, so that the smallest amount of space, like right around you, that's the whole universe in some ways, just in the little space that you're in. The whole thing is there. It's all connected holographically. And it's just kind of like, the little holograms we have in our credit cards or whatever you use. You've seen holograms before. They can look very convincing, like a three-dimensional image in front of your eyes, but it's really just diffraction of light. And the interesting thing is if you cut a hologram into smaller and smaller pieces, you can still see the whole three-dimensional image, but it gets fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier. So that's the whole thing, is that this kind of three-dimensional universe we feel exists around us could actually be just an equation that is kind of inflated by our consciousness. Now, I know that sounds a little out there, but that's what it kind of says. And there's some experiments that are suggesting that it actually works like that. It's an illusion of three-dimensionality and physicality, but it's really more like energy with this kind of equation in it, and it kind of inflates to look like the way it does. What the point is that, again, whatever you do is kind of connected to everything, and you don't have this separation like we've been taught to believe for the past couple thousand years. It's really whatever you do kind of affects the whole thing, and that's not totally alien, so to speak, to a lot of cultures. Native Americans or others kind of, I think, understood this in a lot of ways with the way they related to nature, and a lot of other traditions, the Taoist tradition also, but the kind of the Western tradition is to kind of separate things, and there's a certain power in that, and there's a certain cost. So I think holography kind of has a lot of really interesting implications for it, and they're finding again experimentally that it's really true. It could be true.
Excellent. In Chapter 2, you speak of the standardization of time and space, and the dictatorship of the clock. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, this is really interesting, Christie, because this is the essence of the fix we got in financially over the past couple of years, is the way we look at time is to kind of break it down into smaller and smaller bits, right? To smaller and smaller chunks of time, eventually into like nanoseconds, which is the way computers work. And if you take all the resources, it started with the Benedictine monks, 500-600 years ago, where they used to want to wake up in the middle of the night to do prayer, so they kind of created clocks, water clocks that would wake them up at 4 a.m. And we've kind of never stopped working that way to break time, from hours into minutes, into seconds. And what it's led us to do is to try to control every little flow of resource down to the nanosecond. From everywhere from workers that get clocked in and clocked out to, the cash out, the cashiers when you check out, who are measured how fast that they check you out through the cashier line at a lot of different, stores. And what it actually led to is these kind of financial markets where you can see, if you care to watch, stock prices go up and down, minute by minute and so forth. It's a real commodification of time. The real drawback of that is while it can make you, for some institutions it can be profitable, it actually always collapses in the end because it's irrational, because the universe really is not this finite machine that you can just measure in these little seconds. It's basically a flowing energy source, and if you chop it up into little bits, what you take out of it is its ability to reformulate. And what I'm trying to say is it loses its resiliency. So if you get a little error in the system, the error is going to magnify a lot more because you don't have that resiliency that you get when you let things flow a little more in a less controlled way. So basically what I'm trying to say is, I know it's kind of making it sound a little complicated. Basically, the more you try to control things, the less control you have.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's what Max Weber, a German sociologist, called the irrationality of rationality. It looks rational from one point of view, right? All this control and everything. But, I mean, it creates this insanity. And there have been some research recently saying that this financial crisis we had, so-called crisis, if that's what it is, it's actually caused by too much news and too much information causing these wild swings from moment to moment. Peaks in the stock market, I've seen real big dives. It's caused by too much of this kind of insider flow of information and too much news, because a little thing gets magnified into a big thing. And even for a couple of years, it looks really good, so everyone's profiting from it. But if you take things like mortgages or something, you break them up and shred them into little bits, and then repackage them and sell them because you can do it. But then it's fundamentally irrational, because what's the whole thing based on? There's really nothing there. And so when it collapses in a bigger way. So I guess what it really shows us is the more you try to control time, past a certain point, it becomes irrational, and it leads the whole thing to collapse. And that's kind of what we're seeing now. And I mean, Christie, I don't want to take credit, but I kind of feel like I was talking about this when I even wrote some of this stuff years ago, and some of this started in my dissertation. I kind of feel like I told you so. People, when I read this, they said, how is this relevant? Well, I think you can see how it's relevant. If you get this non-ending stream of information like we have from cable TV, right, and all these systems that chop everything up into bits, and you put it all together, little errors cascade throughout the system. And they can take years to percolate through, but when it finally percolates through, what you realize is that the system is fundamentally burning fumes, right?
Well, yeah, and see, after, that in Chapter 3, you begin speaking about how our collective belief systems created an iron cage.
Yes.
And that's exactly what they built us into with, as you explain, the bureaucratization of knowledge and, the industrialization and crisis of control. I mean, they basically put us all into this little box, this prepackaged little box that they're going to control us, and we're going to believe and think and see everything they want us to. But that's not everything there is to see and know.
No, but
and
it's
understand.
Exactly it. It's called quantaphrenia. It's this false belief that what measures the best, what measures the most easily numerically, is somehow the most important. And what you end up is people that are objectified into a credit score. And we know how rational that system is. Come on, give me a break. This is exactly what we're talking about with an iron cage, where everyone's just associated with a number, right? And now it looks like it's even going farther into healthcare data and so forth. And there's a lot of serious concern about this, because what you're doing is still the reductionist paradigm, which is reduce everything into a number, into a measurable system. I guarantee you all these things have to collapse. They're not based on reality. It's just a numerical system. Look at what happened with, again, going back to the credit markets. The reason we got into this situation is you had physicists designing these equations to deal with these kind of these mortgage-backed bonds, right, that were based on these subprime mortgages, right? You have physicists developing these formulas around this. Well, I'm sorry, people are not machines. They don't operate in this bell curve fashion the way physics thinks the world works. You can hire all these people you want. I've talked to some of these people. They're really smart. We'd have a lot of fun talking to them. But that isn't the model of how people work. And there's a huge disconnect. And all these financial institutions really thought they were going to strike it rich by kind of cornering the market on knowledge with these physicists and these information people, right, these computer people. And they totally burned themselves out, and they're actually asking us to pay for it now. But, I mean, what did you guys expect?
Well,
Give me a break.
That was redesigned and for total control, a redistribution of wealth, but not, like Robin Hood, the rich paying for the poor, it's the poor paying for the rich.
That's exactly what you got going on now.
But we submitted to it. That's
no, we
the
did.
thing.
Christie, you're right. We can't just blame them. We kind of got too relaxed with this and too easygoing to let them do this. And, we have got to take responsibility for our resonance. And we got to say, hey, it's our reality too. And we get to say how it is. It doesn't just flow up to a few institutions that are creating, like you said, an iron cage. But, sociologists were talking about this iron cage 100 years ago, and it took like a long time to manifest, but we ended up in it one way or another, which is a very rigid, closed-in system that you can see does not have a lot of ability to respond to shocks. A couple shocks here and there, and it's like off the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you got to come to the taxpayers to fix it up. It's like, excuse me. I mean, really, you guys created this. What are you doing? What?
It's not my debt.
No, I mean, this is totally predictable. It's just that when you get that level of, greed going or something, it just, to me, the most amazing thing is you can understand this if you step outside the box. It's just that the greed factor is so high that I had a lot of friends who went into this from high school, went into this sort of trading. I know what they've been doing all these years, And I'll tell you, their concern was certainly not the resiliency of the whole system. And what we're learning now is what you do to anybody affects you now really quickly in a very short amount of time. It's because we're all interconnected. So there's no way you can, Christie, here's the thing. For years, we could get away with kind of doing bad things to people because we hid it away or we polluted and we exported the waste, There's nowhere left to go. The whole earth is occupied now, and everything goes around very quickly. There's nowhere left to export the waste. We got to deal with our own waste now, and the waste it's kind of an attitude of not caring at all about what your actions do, and what as long as you're doing well with it, you can feel it's not me, so let someone else suffer. But now you can see if anybody suffers, we all kind of suffer with it, and so that's the quantum point of view. Basically, it goes around, it comes around. That's really what it comes down to in a lot of ways. Here's the whole thing. I really believe that the universe is fundamentally self-correcting. I actually believe it's a pretty much a gentle place that self-corrects, and no matter what humans will do to mess it up, it's going to fix itself up. So don't worry too much about it. It's pretty big, and it's pretty powerful, and it can correct these mistakes. And what I'm talking about is paradox here. The ironic thing is the military, which you usually think of as something that exerts force, kills things and blows things up, kills people and blows things up, is what they say, what they really do. An extension of foreign policy, They invented this system which it involves you being very sensitive to your feelings. That's what remote viewing is paying attention to your feelings as they come in and not editing anything out. And that's I think that's why the military really didn't like remote viewing in the long run, is because it didn't work according to the culture of the military, which is basically based on exerting force at one level or another, with a lot of control. But obviously that's the end result a lot of the time. But remote viewing is the opposite. It's almost like a controlled crash, because you start out and you got a blank sheet of paper and you're given these coordinates, and somebody knows the target somewhere, but you don't consciously know it. And the only way to get that answer is to lose a little control for a while and just to feel what you're feeling. And pretty soon the target comes across in your feelings. You don't know if you're right or wrong while you're doing the session. You can't tell if you're correct or not. You're just writing it all down, just trusting the system. And so it kind of is this touchy-feely stuff. And they got a lot of good results sometimes. And I can tell you, I've talked to enough of the military people from the RV program. Their superiors were not happy with this at all, especially the better they did. Like when they located that blinder bomber, that Soviet blinder bomber that Libyan pilot defected with in 1978. It went down in this jungle in the Congo. And the remote viewers found it just from 2 remote viewing sessions. They knew where to send. They sent this Delta Force team in based on the remote viewing, and they found it, right? The people back at the Air Force were not happy about this because it made them comparatively look bad, right? Because these remote viewers found it. The satellites couldn't find it, right? The remote viewers found it. They fired these people. And they had done, President Carter gave them like a medal, and that was the problem, is they got all this attention, and other people were jealous.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of the reason we're not using RV more than we could be using it is because nobody wants to be outdone. And we still have this system where people are kind of hanging on to the old way because they don't want the new ways. Well, we're going to go there one way or another, but you can understand what's happening. I mean, the military has a certain way and promotion and everything. All of a sudden these people come along and they're these superstars. There's a bit of jealousy going on there.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
well, the many projects they've had, Project Talent or Phoenix are all, basically sub-projects, MK Ultra and Stargate. I mean, this is a fact. They've been doing this at least, 40, 50 years that we know of.
Right.
There are still some skeptics in the room, and they asked the question, Stargate, does that have something to do with the Illuminati? Can you answer that for us, please?
I don't know if it has anything to do with the Illuminati, because I only know about this from the people I've talked to in the RV program, a lot of them, and the conferences and so forth, everything I've read about it. And it was created by a couple guys in the Defense Department that were, they were afraid of security back in the 70s. They thought the Soviets had these psychics and they could start reading our minds, and looking at the missile codes and everything. So they really became concerned, and they contracted out to SRI. And this program, they got these natural psychics to create this, how are you doing it? And they figured out in their minds what they were doing, and they created this teachable system. So it really kind of had a pretty practical purpose when it was originally invented, and it had the name Stargate and a whole bunch of different names that it went through as different programs kind of picked it up and then let it go. The Air Force had another name for it, and a whole bunch of different, kind of like military has these project names. It changed names a bunch of times. Stargate was when it was in its CIA version. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Well, here's the thing. There were currently a couple meetings where I'm told there were some pretty high-up people that nobody still knows to this day who these people were. When a lot of people in the room wanted to cancel the program, it just looked like one person to raise their hand. The guy with dark glasses smoking a cigarette who would just say, no, we want the program to stay, and nobody knows who these people were, what department they came from, but they had enough authority to scare everyone else out in the room, and they kept the program going. So maybe the person asking that question, maybe there's just groups. We know these groups exist from the UFO technology and so forth. And maybe these people knew there was some important reason to keep the RV going, because it would have been canceled a lot sooner if it hadn't been some of these more secretive, powerful people who in these meetings, raised their voice or just raised their hand actually, and the program kept going for another year. I mean, we don't know who these people were, so maybe there is some deeper connection to that. It's just I can't verify that, but we have those stories, so.
We've covered at least, scratched the surface of a few different issues tonight, and I know there's so much more to expound upon, but we do have a few callers, so how do you feel about getting a couple of those calls out of the way?
Sure, let's do it.
All right. Our first call tonight is Louis B. Welcome to the show, Louis.
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. How you doing?
Well, I don't know what's up with this guy. Because, I mean, all I've been hearing him for the past, hour and a half is him waxing poetic. Where's the proof? I mean, it's like, okay, you're talking about how you're talking about the history of how this program started, which I was doing like a little quick research. You guys are coming out of the MK Ultra type of thing going on here, putting LSD in the university water supplies and shit.
I don't know what. Yeah, that's certainly a problem. I know it has to do with remote viewing. I mean, there's no direct connection that I know about between putting drugs in water and this. They never put drugs in the water for these people because they want them to get accurate results. So.
I mean, my question is,
what's the question?
When did you graduate from Camp Swampy?
Camp Swampy? Where's Camp Swampy?
You sure you don't know where Camp Swampy is?
I guarantee you I don't know where Camp Swampy is. Where is it?
Wow.
Enlighten us. Where's Camp Swampy?
That's where they train the CIA operatives.
I have never worked for the CIA. I'm a PhD in sociology, and I mean, I'm an academic who came across this program. I mean, Louis, the program was declassified in 1995. Anyone can take courses in it, and anyone can learn about it. You don't have to be connected to the government to. We're talking about, the reason, let me just get something out of the way here, Louis, by the way. The reason we do this training, we're not creating psychic spies or anything like that. It's not. The point is, and my really belief about this is, we all have this potential. A lot of us don't know it's there. I certainly didn't know I had it before I took this course. And it's really exciting to see people kind of light up like a light bulb to realize, wow, I have this, I don't know, you can call it a skill, an ability that I didn't know I had. And it's amazing to see people really kind of develop their full potential. So we do it just to help people kind of see more what they are. I mean, I have no spooky reason for doing it, or, I mean, that could be interesting to you. I'm not against that, but that's not why I actually do this now.
So how's about instead of trying to sell your book, how's it work? Why don't you tell us how we could do it? I mean, look, I know how a plant produces oxygen. That's scientifically proven. I mean, how can I fly in the air, have bullets bounce off my chest, jump the Empire State Building in a single bound, run faster than a locomotive? I mean, with remote viewing. I mean, you're promising all these superpowers. I mean, tell us how it works instead of, trying to hawk your book.
Louis, I'm not trying to hawk my book. I've sold like 5,000 copies of it. I don't need to see it sell anymore my book. I'm perfectly happy with the sales record. I'm explaining it to you. Christie happens to enjoy my book, and I think it's a good book, but I'm not trying to sell it to you. Listen, remote viewing took me like a week to learn how to do that. I simply can't teach you in 5 minutes over the radio interview.
I just want proof. Where's the meat? That's what I want to know. Where's the beef?
The beef is in you, Louis. It's in you developing these skills. And I am not going to spend energy. I know what you want me to do. You want me to try to prove it to you, right?
Exactly.
I'm not going to do that. Sorry, buddy.
Why aren't you going to prove it to me?
Because I don't care if you believe in it or not.
So you expect me to just take it on faith?
Can I just finish my sentence, Louis? I listened to your question. Let me answer, okay? I'm not expecting you to take it on faith. What I'm hoping you will do is to go to your library, right? Not buy anything. Just go to your library or go down the internet and do your research. I have no interest one way or another whether you believe this or not. I am done trying to convince people this is real because I don't really care. If you don't want to believe in this, that's fine. All I'm asking you to do is to have an open mind.
I mean, look,
do some of your own research.
Just because I don't immediately believe what you say, I have a closed mind. I mean, hell,
no,
I'm in the 9/11 truth movement. I found it pretty easy to believe that my government is trying to kill me. I found it very easy to believe that there are, evil group of people that want to establish a new world order, and enslave the people and kill 80% of the population. That's pretty easy to prove.
Louis,
but
I didn't say you had a closed mind.
Jumping from New York to Paris, like Hayden Christensen did in that movie, that's pretty hard without
I know.
proof.
I've been trying to tell you through the whole radio show that it was very hard for me to believe in this too. What Christie has been trying to tell you from the beginning, and she's trying to been getting out of me, is that I didn't believe it until I actually took a course in it, and I saw I was getting the results. And quite frankly, I don't expect you to believe it either until you see some results.
Which you charge on the radio site.
Let me Louis.
Yeah.
What Simeon's talking about is we're just discovering it and we're exploring it. And I can assure you that, correct me, Dr. Hein, do we know everything there is to be known about what we're talking about here tonight?
No, we don't. We know like about 1 or 2% of it. We've got a long ways to go.
And Louis, why one of the blessings we have of having Simeon here with us on a regular basis is because what he is sharing with us is insights that help us understand other aspects of this thing we're defining. We see what we're seeing from another angle better. And then hopefully when he hears what we're seeing, he expands his angle. And soon we will have a more clearly defined image of this thing we speak of because it is there. We aren't creating this stuff out of thin air. It's not evil. It is real, and it is a part of our existence. And
I just got a feeling that this is just a distraction.
But Louis, wait a minute. It is not, though. It is the ignorance of this existence that allows those who you just described are playing us through the 9/11 thing, okay? I mean, it all ties together. There is a common thread here in who is responsible for hiding it from us, who gave it to us, and Simeon said something spot on earlier. Whatever you want to call your creator, he didn't create us to be dumb and stupid and slaves to another man. He didn't.
That is true.
Okay?
It's written that man has ruled man to his injury. Yes, of course, I understand.
Right,
so why do you reject this, though?
What? Being able to poof stuff out of thin air? That is not one of our abilities.
Why do you argue for your limitation?
How do you know? Have you ever tried it?
The fact.
Have you ever tried it?
Have I ever tried it? I haven't tried to put my hand in the fire, but I know it will burn my hand.
Okay, but this is different. How
I
do
mean,
you know?
and he hasn't come out with any proof to convince me. He hasn't come out with any proof.
You're not going to know it until you try. He didn't know until he tried. He's made that very clear. Why do you reject it so to the point where you're afraid to even try it before you reject it?
No, I mean, what you're saying is important. What Louis is saying is it's very relevant. It's just that there's a tendency to be overly skeptical by the time we reach a certain age of adulthood. You know, there's videos of people walking across hot coals who don't get burned. If you can train yourself to do it, they get into a certain hypnotic state. They do not get burned. If you and I walk on those coals without the training, we'll get burned. So the thing about fire, you know, Louis mentions fire. I understand that there's a certain level of fear around this topic of remote viewing. But believe me, and I can't convince you of this, but all I can say is trust me, all it is fear of yourself, of part of yourself you don't know. It's kind of like a limb that went to sleep, you know, if you laid on it while you were sleeping at night and you get those tingling pins and needles feelings, and eventually you could lose feeling in it if you don't move around. We have like those etheric limbs on our body. We've just forgot that they were there. But it's not to be anything to be afraid of. It's just a part of you that you don't know. Now, it is true, any of these things can be abused. Fire can be used to cook your meal or can burn your house down, right? And if you train yourself to walk on coals, you can do that too. So it kind of depends on your attitude towards it. But it's not inherently dangerous. It's just kind of the way you use it. So I would say to you, Louis, anyone else who's listening, do not believe what I'm saying. Do not believe a word of it. I would only believe your own experience. I would do your own research and come to your conclusions. They may be different than my conclusions, that you're entitled to do that, but just take some time to do your own research. You know, the reason is I can't convince you this is real. I could quote you all the studies. I mean, I've got all the books here right in front of me with all the statistics. It'd be boring for you to listen to me recite that forever, and you still wouldn't be convinced. The only way you're going to convince yourself is I'm offering you challenging you to go into the unknown a little bit of yourself and take a course in it, or just read a good book about it, or go online, watch some YouTube videos about it, and make up your own mind. That's all I'm asking you to do.
You know, I don't have an experience with hot rocks or coals, burning coals, I should say. And I'm scared to death of fire. However, this past summer on a road trip, I did walk on hot rocks barefoot for an hour with actually a guest we had on the show last week speaking about some of these phenomena as well. So, you know, anything is possible. I truly believe that anything is possible.
Christie, have you ever seen a hypnosis demonstration?
I've only seen like what they have on TV, but I've never seen or been involved in a real life, hypnotist.
A friend of mine, Terry, in Salt Lake City, is kind of like professional hypnotist, and she's also done RV and so forth, right? She uses it to help people quit smoking and so forth, things like that. But occasionally she'll do parties, for groups of people for fun. And I couldn't believe it when I saw what she was capable of doing. I mean, convincing people that their shoes were cell phones that were speaking to Martians. And people pick them up in a hypnotic state, and they will start speaking Martian. I don't know where they learned Martian from, but they can become as hard as boards. I mean, all of a sudden she'll tell them that they're as stiff as a board, and people can walk across them. Now, I bet you wouldn't think you could have a 200-pound person walking across you if you're spread between two chairs, your head on one chair and your feet on another. But when you're hypnotized, you can. And you can make people think that they're hot or they're cold. And here's the thing. The subconscious doesn't really know the difference between reality and what it's told. And what we're really learning is if it wants to believe something, if you kind of tell it something, it can actually act like that's true. And so what you're saying really, Christie, and it's really true, it's borne out by all these we've seen in hypnotism and anything else, we're all kind of hypnotized all the time anyway, just to a certain version of reality we believe in. And you can change those beliefs, and all of a sudden, you've got a different reality. You know, what people can do in a hypnosis demonstration, you could apply to your life and do all the time, is basically convince yourself that another reality is true, and it actually becomes true for you. It really does become true. And so there's a lot about the human mind we still don't understand, but what we do know is we're not nearly as limited as we think we are. And that's really the point.
As some of us want to think we are. I seem to think that this so-called reality that they've designed for us is, in fact, the true illusion. These the etherical or the dimensions or the unseen, the things that we are experiencing are absolutely the reality.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm backwards, but that's just my opinion.
No, reality. Well, here's the thing about reality. As Louis says, or anyway, you're going to wax poetic about it, but this is the truth. You kind of see in reality what you expect to see. When we're talking about inattentional blindness, remember that study?
What you're comfortable seeing.
Yeah, we know from the data that you delete more than 99% of what comes into your eyes and ears every second. No joke. You're only seeing about 16 bits out of about 40 million every second that come into your senses, just your physical senses. So if you look around in the room where you are right now, that's about 0.001% of what's coming into your eyes and ears, really. Because your mind, and for good reason, says, I can't take that much. I only need to see what I need to see. So your mind is like a deletion machine, and it's basically deleting what you don't want to see. And in the same way, you could be deleting things that maybe are important to you now. And I often believe, you ever seen those pictures that people take of, like, they're taking a picture of their family at a picnic or something at the beach, and there's a UFO in the picture that nobody saw? Yeah. It's happened to me a couple times, too. Orbs, things like this, or something strange standing there that nobody saw at the time. Hard to say what it is later on. It looks like another person or something in the background. Yeah. It's that there's other things around, and your mind says, your subconscious sees it, but your conscious mind says, I don't have time to deal with this right now. I'm on a picnic, right? So you delete it, and then we've gotten some of the best UFO photos ever of people just taking a picture of a family member or loved one, standing on a mountaintop or something, and there's this big disc right there in the back. Some of the best photos that have been analyzed have been taken that way. The person probably saw it somewhere. It's just that the conscious mind deleted it out because it said, I don't need to see that UFO. It's not relevant to me right now. And so that's the risk we run by being too restrictive into what we accept is real. Again, don't take my word for it. I mean, just do your own experiments, do your own reading. But we know physiologically that basically our minds delete almost everything that comes in except a little bit that we need to survive. So there's a lot of room to grow.
We are truly living in the matrix. I love that. I chose that music for the show tonight because I just think that they did a wonderful job of showing us possibly something similar to what we are experiencing. And I think that, even I forget the characters' names. I don't have that kind of memory, but the guy who took the red pill and, then just after he knew everything, his system, he just could not handle it because he was so comfortable in the little box. He just had to go back, to this fake reality they want us to live where we're all basically dumbed down little slaves.
Right, and we're not going to be dumbed down slaves anymore, I can tell you that.
Not me.
Those days are over. And it's over because we have this ability to do these shows right now, the Internet. We have a lot of capability right now. And just one thing, let me just mention something. YouTube, all this free video sites, you can put up videos of anything. Just to go back to Louis for a second, anyone's interested. If you go to YouTube and search on, my name, Simeon Hein, or just how remote viewing works, I've got some videos up there, and in part 7 of one from the Laughlin UFO conference from 2005, I actually walk the audience through a remote viewing session. I give you instruction right on the video there. So this is completely free. Just go to YouTube and look up remote viewing and go to part 7.
I actually did it. I went through, the videos, not really knowing what I was going to hear, and the 7th video came up, and we were supposed to pick a location, and I'm sitting here on the computer thinking, okay, this is really stupid.
Don't say what it is.
Through a video? No, I'm not. But it
How'd you do?
I got it.
Yeah,
exactly.
you see.
And I had never even heard of that place at that point. I even left a comment. I'm like, oh my gosh, it blew my mind. And I was really, I was questioning myself, watching a YouTube video. Should I really do this? Do I really want to put effort into this? And I did. And, I've seen Ed Dame's videos, and I've gone through a few lessons on there. And, I understand the questions and wondering, But, I mean, right there on a YouTube video, I experienced that myself. So there is definitely something going on here. I know, a sound guy, you have a few questions you'd like to get in before the break?
I've read in at least 3 different independent sources that the heart is actually also made up of gray matter, or a part of the thinking process in these units, and that there's also a piece of gray matter on the top of our top intestine. And so we have the gray matter that's between our ears, behind our eyes, and that sits on our shoulders. And then we have 60% of the muscle that pumps blood is also gray matter, and then there's another piece of gray matter on our gut, and there's a neural net that ties that together. Is that a fair evaluation of our physiology?
Yes, it's much more complicated than we've been taught. There is a second brain in our gut, and I believe it has as many neurons as your physical brain does. They're a different type, but they're neurons, and they communicate like a brain. And the reason is because your digestion is so important that in case of spinal injury, evolution created us to have a second brain down there to keep digesting. And so what we're really learning is the brain is not just something in between your ears. That's just one part of the brain. There's more brains in your body. There's the intestinal brain, and as you're saying, there could be brains in the heart. It's another sort of thinking. And again, that's kind of what I call, starting to go towards planetary intelligence. Intelligence is just more than calculation. There's a lot of different types of intelligence, and the heart has its own intelligence. The book, The Heart's Code, is about people that have had organ transplants, and they begin to get the emotions and memories of the people they got the organ from. There's different levels of intelligence in different parts of our body, and we need to learn to respect those different intelligences and pay attention to them, because, they're talking to you all the time in their own language, not in words, but in this kind of feeling. That's what gut feeling is. You know that gut feeling is very accurate. And there's this wonderful book we should talk more about. It's called Harebrained Tortoise Mind, How Intelligence Increases When You Think Less. And they found, this is by Guy Claxton. I mean, everyone ought to read this book. It's full of these wonderful studies that show, basically, that you're more happy with your decisions if you don't think about it so much. And if you just go on your gut feeling, like, for example, people buy cars or homes, if they just kind of go with that feeling, I like this or I don't, you're actually more happy with your purchase. They've measured this than if you think about it too much. And that's because there's other types of intelligence in your body that we haven't been trained to listen to so much because we've been trained so rationally. But if you pay attention to those, they're working for you. They're trying to do their best for you. It's just often we're not listening, So those different types of intelligence really matter. And there's an intelligence in the heart and intestine. Probably, the Taoists believe that each organ has its own sort of energy and intelligence. And that they really do. The liver is so complex that modern science hasn't even found a way to replicate a human liver, with machines. It does like 500 different things. Think about that all at once.
One of our text chatters would like to know, how do you tell the difference between imagination and RV?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
No,
It's a
very good question, because the original idea, it's more complex than it sounds, but the original idea is that you want to separate out the imagination from your imagination from the signal data from the target, because imagination, like when you close your eyes and imagine something, it's kind of fainter than when you open your eyes and see something, through your eyes. But the RV signal is even fainter than the imagination by the same magnitude as your imagination is fainter than when you look, something physically, if you got that right. And so your imagination can actually swamp the RV signal, because the RV signal is pretty subtle. And this is why you need a system to do this. It's not that you need to learn how to do RV. Let me just make that clear. You need to remember how to do it. You already know how to do it. The problem that you have is that the other signals in your mind are so loud you can't hear it anymore. Little kids can hear it, you know. That's why they are the way they are, so spontaneous, and they have imaginary play friends and stuff. They can still get those subtle signals before it's kind of drilled out of them by these louder The logical mind is very loud, and the speaking mind is pretty loud. I know mine is. And even in my own head. And so you want to basically quiet the noise down so that you can see the signal a little bit, and then you'll find somewhere in the back of your mind there's this screen where the images show up on, or the information, but it can be it's a lot subtler than imaginary information. However, having said all that, there is another idea, if you believe in parallel universes, that almost anything you can imagine is real somewhere, that it's not just some fantasy in your head. I mean, I think modern physics is starting to go in this direction a little bit. Even in Scientific American, they're talking about an unlimited amount of parallel realities. So it's possible that what will be happening in your imagination is not something that you're completely inventing. You just may be tuning in to another version of reality, a parallel reality to this one. Maybe it's only a little different, maybe it's a lot different, but it exists somewhere. It's really happening somewhere. I mean, how's that for an idea? But it's the same ability to tune into that imagination a little bit, like you're tuning into the RV signal. You're kind of tuning into a slightly different reality. And so they kind of go along with each other. So just to sum it up, I know I'm saying a lot about this, is traditionally the idea is that your imagination interferes with RV. But, you know, imagination can also be a very productive tool. I mean, you know that if you want to accomplish something in your life or do something you've never quite done before, develop a new business or a skill or something, you really need to work at the visualization of it. It's not just some new age stuff that you got, you know, from The Secret or the Law of Attraction, which I actually think really works. You really do need to actually see how you're going to do it. Like right now, just as an example, we're working on the crop circle tour for this summer in England. You know, I really need to sit down and I need to see us being there in the hotel, out there in the crop circles, visiting Stonehenge, so I can put it all together. If I can't see that ahead of time, it's not going to work. So imagination is a very powerful tool, and RV is kind of a slightly different angle from that. It's another kind of shifting around, but instead of deliberately visualizing, you're kind of letting the information come to you and not trying to impose anything on it. But you can work the two together also in a lot of different ways, but they are slightly different, if that makes sense.
So I guess imagination would be more of a either an illusion or reality that we can create, but the RV is a reality that we let come to us.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay.
RV is a stage being more passive than imagination. And this is why it's very challenging to do RV. A lot of us aren't trained to be comfortable being passive like that. It's just kind of part of our culture, is to kind of be doers rather than receivers. You know, it's going to create, to make things the way we want them to be. And the challenge, I think especially for men sometimes with RV, you just got to let the information come to you without doing anything to it at all. You just have to be a very good receiver of the information, kind of like a crystal. You're just trying to not color it with your own light. You're trying to get the information in there and write it down before your conscious mind has the ability to play with it. And all of our education, everything is designed to get anything that comes in there and change it and modify it, right? Make it into what you want it to be.
Yeah.
RV is the opposite of that. It's just receiving the information and writing it down. There's like a 3-second rule. If you wait longer than 3 seconds, guaranteed your conscious mind is going to start coloring it. And you know you're imagining it when it gets colorful. Okay, believe me. When you're doing an RV session and it starts getting very 3D and very colorful, most of the time, not always, sometimes that really can be contact, but for most of us, that's when your imagination is kicked in. It's not to say that that's not a real reality somewhere, but that may not be the particular target that you've been assigned to look at. So it's really about being passive in some senses and active enough to prevent your conscious mind from interfering. Does that make any sense?
Absolutely, and he did say wonderful, thank you so much on the interface, so I think you did answer our question. Well, I'd like to make sure we get to all the callers. So our next call tonight is from Kentucky. Kentucky, welcome to the show.
Hey, I guess I made it in.
Well,
Hey
hello there. How you doing?
Pretty good. First of all, I'd like to tell the good doctor I don't need any convincing about RV. I know it works. I've seen it work too many times. I do have a question, and it relates to something. When I was on the interface trying to listen on the PC, it was cutting in and out. So if you've answered this before, forgive me for asking, but when you said that when Project Stargate was about to be canceled once, a couple of guys with suits and smoky glasses came in, what year was that, if you know?
I'm repeating that story. It's a public story. It's not something I just heard in private, so it's not classified. I think we're talking about late 70s, as far as I know, and it was one guy in particular that came in who apparently was wearing a military uniform with no particular identification of which branch of the military. Very obviously a lot of stars and medals on his uniform, so someone high up, but nobody knew who he was. And he had enough authority, someone knew who he was, because when he was the only one in the room that wanted to keep the program. And as soon as the vote was taken, he left the room again, according to what I'm told. So one person kept the program going. When it could have been canceled years ahead of its time, we never even found out about it, except for this one guy who comes in who's some secret branch of the military intelligence community who has enough authority that even though 30 other people in the room wanted to kill the program, he was enough to keep it going, just because he apparently muttered 3 words: the program stays. And that was it. So somebody wanted this to keep going, and somebody knows more than the rest of those people. It was not popular in the regular military for reasons we talked about.
Right. Well, there's been so much infighting in the branches of the military and the different alphabet soup agencies, especially since 1982.
Oh yeah.
I'm surprised that they're even able to keep any kind of intelligence communications open. But the reason I was asking is I have a very good idea who that gentleman was.
I have no name associated with it, so even if you mentioned it, I wouldn't know.
Right.
Maybe we shouldn't say, because it's,
I
have no clue who it was.
I want to hear it.
He and I know each other very well, and we don't like each other, so I really just don't care.
Oh, good. Well, you actually know who I'm talking about then, right?
Yeah, I know. The guy's name, and I say was, because it's my information that I have. He's dead now. It was named Paul Preston. He was
I don't know that name,
a major general. Yeah, he was actually in the CIA. He was a major electronics expert when he first started. He joined the service during the Korean War, actually, and moved himself right on up from there. And he was involved in a tremendous amount of black op projects from the Korean War right on through.
And he was a smoker?
Big time, King.
That could be him. I mean, we got the name. Finally, after all this, you actually knew this person.
Yes, I did. He was a friend of my father's. They actually grew up together.
That's amazing. That could be true. I mean, that could be.
And from what I understand, your father was CIA, right?
My father was CIA. Mr. Preston was at one time, this is how I wound up in the islands, was station chief in San Juan. And they had some jobs to do in St. Thomas, setting up some listening command posts and whatnot, and one thing led to another, and I wound up a half-sister. And I was sent there to live as a young boy. That's about the same time, or just a little bit after I was indoctrinated into Project Talent. And that's where a lot of the personality splitting and whatnot took place. And I stayed there for several years and continue to go back. But
well, Duncan, I know who you are. There, I just said your name.
Okay, well, I don't
maybe
care.
Our guest and maybe our callers don't know who you are. Do you want to give a little brief background on your knowledge of these projects and the existence of the matter we're speaking of tonight?
I was taken at 6 years old, turned over to the Central Intelligence Agency by my parents. I didn't find out that my father was involved with the CIA until about 5 years after he died. I had to go back to St. Thomas and be told by the family attorney, quite frankly, that he was involved in the CIA. And I was given over at 6 years old to a project known as Project Talent. And one of the things that you spoke of earlier in the interview I liked is that these projects change names like we change socks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was Project Talent in 1966. What it's called today, who knows? Or even if it still exists. And part of that is they kind of put us to school, sent us to school. And they were looking for kids who would be psychic soldiers then, remote viewers, or we didn't call it remote viewing then. We were told that it was called far seeing things from afar, is how we were told. And quite frankly, I sucked at it. I was one of the worst they ever had. But I knew a lot of people who were, God, they were fantastic. I was more of a trained to be more soldier, assassin, et cetera, that kind of thing, more than a psychic. However, I am in contact presently with several of the people who were in the project with me. And one of them is a fantastic remote viewer. And she's a natural. There was, no courses or anything. She's just a total natural at it. Reader's Digest version, Christie, what else?
Well, can I ask you a question about that, Duncan?
Absolutely.
I've seen some of you've done other interviews recently, right? Project Camelot and
that was a couple of years ago, yeah.
Right. Well, what I was wondering, I think you're kind of answering one of the questions that was brought up earlier, because my understanding of this just dates from the early 70s, but I have come across, as I mentioned, former Special Forces soldiers that were taught this in the 60s, and now you're kind of another example where somebody knew about this well before the SRI program, right?
Absolutely. The information that some of us have gotten is that this was actually being performed as early as the 1940s on a scientific basis.
Mm-hmm.
They really didn't have a clue what they were getting into. It was in the early 60s when they began to see that, we can use this. We don't know exactly what the hell we'll use it for, but we'll move forward with it and see what comes out of it. And that's when they began, the reason they took certain children is debatable. I've been told a dozen different reasons why, all the way from it being certain blood groups, genetics, which I'm sure genetics does play a part. And one of the things we do know is that it is generational. Okay, my father was CIA. Most of the people that I know now that were in the projects with me, their parents or grandparents in one way or another were in the government, whether in some form of military, intelligence agency or whatnot. They were there. They were part of it.
Yeah.
And whether they wanted to be part of it or not.
Well, I didn't want any part of this, okay? I didn't have a choice. And also, interestingly enough, about 2 years ago, correction on that, about a year ago, there was an article, I believe, it's linked on my website somewhere, from the New York Times, where they finally admitted that they were putting implants in soldiers during Vietnam to increase their physical ability, increase their range. And what I mean by that is that they could go days without sleep, et cetera, that these experiments were going on then in the mid-'60s, late 60s, early 1970s. So, no, this has been around for a very long time.
Wow. What is your website, by the way?
It's very, very long.
Okay.
The easiest way to find it is to go to wintersteel.com.
Mm-hmm.
Go to the home page, go all the way down to the bottom. There's a who's who. There's only two of us there.
All right.
My name's there. Click on it, boom, takes you straight to it.
Right, fascinating.
And you're in our TruthBrigade.org a few times, and also a few free downloadable archives. and links as well.
I just think, Christie, this is a very refreshing show. This guy, he knows what he's talking about.
Well, I know that. That's
well,
why
so do you,
Excellent. Well, do you have any other questions or comments to share with us?
No, it's just I'm fascinated and overjoyed that when he brought the guy in the smoky glasses up, I started getting flashes. And as soon as I got the flashes, I got the sick feeling in my stomach. That's when I know I've got a hit.
Wow.
And I was seeing Paul, and I hadn't seen Paul since I was in my late teens. And when I saw him, I wanted to kill him. That's how sick the guy makes me feel, just thinking about him.
Well, Duncan, the next time I go to one of these RV conferences, I can approach the person that told the story and give them the name and see if that, because what we were always told is, nobody could identify who that guy was, but he had an awful lot of power to convince those people to change their minds, because apparently as soon as he said the program stays, all of their arms just dropped like a stone to, say we didn't want it. So he was that type of person. So maybe you might know who we're talking about. It's fascinating.
Well, also, too, on a side note, he may not have even been in the military.
Yeah.
Okay. Because, quite frankly, we were all... See, my half-sister was involved in this, too. She was given the rank of major in the Marine Corps, but she never served a day in the Marine Corps.
Uh-huh.
And the reason for that is so she can move freely from military base to military base if need be, without any hardship or trials. No BS. She could just go straight in.
Yeah,
wow. And most of us were given some form of military rank. And most high-level CIA agents are the same way. They hold some type of military rank.
Yeah, that would make a lot of sense. That really fits what we're talking about. So you might have actually nailed this. You're the first person I've ever heard who's actually added any information to that particular story. So
I had never heard it before.
Okay.
I had never heard.
You got a hit on it, yeah.
But you just know the guy.
I know the guy. I knew the guy very well.
Well, what's funny is that right here on our show, right here at Truth Brigade, when you were on another time, Duncan, we found out that you also know some other people I know.
Yep, correct.
Which was really interesting, who happened to have worked on you. It was in the 60s.
I remember the shot very well. Or the injection, as we should say.
Who was that nice fellow? I don't know.
That was your grandfather, darling.
Oh, yeah, the same one that... So, I mean, it's so sad that we have this amazing ability. Everybody has it. All of this is right at our fingertips, but, the sad fact of the matter is that we do know that this has been also used for bad things, and you obviously, Duncan, was one of the millions of victims of this kind of torture and procedures. I don't understand how such a beautiful gift or a beautiful part of our souls, our bodies, our minds could be corrupted in such a manner. But
yeah,
I guess we'll be able to talk about that when we have you on the show next month.
Yeah,
March
we will.
17th.
But, we're finding that there's more of us alive than I expected. And that, to me, that's a great feeling. We're all, as Dan's very admirably said last week, we're all damaged goods. However, damaged goods can be repaired, and that's what we're trying to do with each other, is repair each other.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I'd like this guy on my team.
I'll be on your team anytime, Duncan.
I'm the bodyguard for the team. One of the things that we did is one of the jobs is one of the remote viewers, and I'll say this real quick, and I got to get out of here. I got a conference call coming up, is that we had a lady that I worked with. She did the remote viewing. She would put one hand on my back, and she would see what needed to be seen and give me directions in which to launch whatever assault or attack that we were going to do at that time. So that's a military application.
She would just put her hand on your back, and you could tell what.
Yeah, she would view the target. And we had a very good mind link. We knew what each other were saying. One of my major mental, I guess, linguistic talent is that I get mental images of what someone's thinking. It's not that I hear what they're thinking. It's not that I go inside their head and walk around. I just get a mental image. Like if we're talking and you're thirsty, I may see running water, and I'll ask you, "Are you thirsty?" And it's usually it, or however it works. What she would do is she would view the target and relay it to me, and I would launch the assault.
I see, right. That's amazing. It's obviously someone's been learning how this works a long time ago.
Well, thanks so much, Duncan, and enjoy your conference call, and looking forward to having you on the show again.
Yeah,
thanks, Carolyn. Thanks, guys.
All right. Wow. Yeah, Duncan definitely has a lot of information and can provide a lot of insight as well as to how remote viewing was, in fact used, and he was part of those projects for a couple decades. Somebody just brought up in the interface and would love to hear you talk a little bit more about the 2D and then the 3D world we touched on a little bit earlier in the show.
Well, there was this great book written a long time ago called Flatland by Edwin Abbott. Have you ever come across that one? And it's just the story of these shapes. And
I have not.
It's the story. It's kind of a parable about our society, but it's these shapes that live on a surface of like a table, like two-dimensional, just a flat surface, just goes, one way or the other way, just a flat surface. And one day a sphere comes to visit them, a three-dimensional sphere. And from the point of view of the entities that live on the table, they call it, a square and a circle, these kind of limited characters. When they see the sphere enter their reality because they live in a two-dimensional surface, they just see a little space open up like a circle that gets bigger and bigger and bigger as the sphere transcends the table, and then goes back up again. And they think they've been visited by ghosts or extraterrestrials or something because it comes out of a three-dimensional reality and they live on a surface, so they can't see up or down. They can just see across, right? So it just pops out of nowhere. And this guy, this A square that says he saw this apparition, is treated like he's insane or something and locked up in an asylum. And,
wow.
And eventually they let him go because the sphere manifests again and they realize, I believe this is how it happens, that he was right, that he saw something that was real. And we're kind of in that stage now. If you can imagine that we're the creatures living on the table surface and we're being visited by these three-dimensional creatures that can go through the table surface, that's our extraterrestrials and our ghosts and apparitions and things that seem to pop in and out of nowhere. They're simply in a higher dimension compared to the people that live on the table surface. And if that's us in our three-dimensional world, then this four-dimensional world is this whole other world of energy information that doesn't really fit into the four walls, and, spaces and paved roads that we normally live amongst. I mean, this is our fate as humans, is to kind of live in this three-dimensional existence. There's nothing wrong with it. We should make it as great as it can be, but we kind of know sometimes that there's just something more than that, at some level. And it seems to me that we're moving in a direction where we've got more evidence, if you need to believe in that, but there's nothing wrong with that too. It's good to have evidence. Got more evidence that there's something really going on here. To me, this is the big issue with the extraterrestrial issue, is they seem to have mastered 4 dimensions, 5 dimensions, 6 dimensions, right? They just kind of pop in and then they disappear again. And that is very hard for our 3D minds to understand. And this is part of the reason why it's very hard to kind of open up to it. But I think as we move in that direction, we're going to get more in touch with that 4-dimensional reality. And to some extent, if this is making sense, that remote viewing is kind of like a 4-dimensional exercise because it frees you from just the space you're in, and your mind can travel to another space-time moment instantly, describe it, and then come back. You're kind of being 4th-dimensional when you do that. And I think we're heading more and more in that direction right now, and it's just the nature of, we can't stop it. It's the way the universe evolves. It just keeps expanding, and we've been in 3D for a long time, and I think we're headed towards 4D and beyond. I mean, it's just going to happen one way or another. So we might as well just, get used to it and play with it a little bit, kind of make it our friend rather than kind of run away from it because it's there,
Absolutely.
So.
That's without a doubt. I guess all we can do is encourage those skeptics to just, try to step out of that box and maybe you don't have to understand everything. I don't think anybody here, including Dr. Hein, has claimed that they know everything about why this works. We just know that it does.
Right, and the thing is to explore it in any way that works for you. It doesn't have to be remote viewing. It could be a lot of different ways. And, there's a lot of TV shows on recently about these sort of topics. People, there's the Ghost Hunters, on the Sci-Fi Channel. I did a conference with them, earlier last year. There's a lot of different ways that you can explore this sort of interdimensional reality, and you can do it in very kind of more down-to-earth ways, too, even just, with meditation, or even, exercise, any sort of mind-body practice. You're kind of coordinating that kind of resonant muscle in a sense. You're just kind of taking, instead of just letting it kind of have no guidance, you can kind of guide it a little bit, kind of tune it up maybe. Kind of more, that's probably a better word, kind of tune it up like a crystal radio or something. And so there's a lot of opportunities, but I really do think, I'm being serious here, I think we're in a stage in our society where you can't really stay behind anymore. You kind of have to make a choice. And there is nothing wrong with being skeptical. It can be very useful, but you have to admit that if you are a scientific person, you're open to evidence and you're willing to look at evidence. And I think there's a lot more evidence out there now in the past few years than there used to be. And you got to, if you're a reasonable person, you'll take a look at it and kind of come to your own conclusions. But I don't think we're at a state anymore where we can just kind of stay on the fence, if you know what I mean. You kind of have to choose where you want to go, and it's a personal decision. It's not, you don't have to join up with lots of other people, but you kind of got to decide how you feel about this stuff, one way or another, because I think the structure of the universe is evolving, and it doesn't, it just doesn't let us stay still forever. I don't know why. I mean, it just doesn't seem to be that season.
Well, I always say when you quit learning, you quit living. I want to thank you again for being here, and I hope you will come back with us.
Oh, sure,
anytime,
I also
want you to know the text chatters on the interface absolutely loved you, and in fact, you have new fans in Sweden that are planning to move in with you just so they can talk to you.
Anytime.
All day long.
I'd love it. Let's just talk. That stuff is great. And anytime, Christie. Thanks for having me here. It's a lot of fun.
Thank you all very much, and good night.